After thoroughly hyping up last week's episode on just every single technical aspect imaginable, and proclaiming it as the best episode of the series thus far, I think most people would agree with that, I was not expecting to leave this week's episode with an even stronger impression, despite the episode literally having no action or fights whatsoever. At least not Klaxosaur fights. And that is just a testament to the insanely compelling character work, dialogue, direction. If last week was a showcase on the animation and the technical aspects, this episode was a showcase for the characters and just how far we can take them. And I could definitely use this as an example for what I meant when I said there are so many directions you can take these characters. You can already see those seeds sprouting and see these characters going in really interesting and engaging directions. And I think this is a good example of just an all-killer, no-filler episode. Pretty much every single scene had something to analyze or discuss or speculate, and that is why I have a mountain of notes in front of me right now. We'll see how long this review goes on for. I would not be surprised if it ends up being another 20+ minute review. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and welcome back to another Darling in the Franxx episode review. Today we are going to be talking about episode 5, Your Thorn, My Badge. And as for what that is referring to, I honestly couldn't tell you straight 100% what that means. One would assume the Thorn refers to Zero Two's effect on Hiro, and maybe My Badge is Hiro's acceptance and ability to pilot a Franxx now. That would be my guess, but I'm not going to spend too long discussing and dissecting that title because there is just way too much to talk about in this episode, like I said. And let's just begin on the main focal point of the episode, and that is Hiro and what is going on with him. They build it up subtly over the episode where we don't really know what's going on with Hiro until later on, and they build on that and build on that until at the end of the episode we have all the details, at least physically, regarding Hiro, not really what is going on, and that is what I am here to discuss right now. I've seen so many theories regarding this. Is this a transformation? Is Hiro becoming a Klaxosaur? Is it a defect? Is this a result of piloting with Zero Two like the other pilots? Or is this something all new? I want to talk about that defect speculation for a second. Some people in the Discord think that this is what happens to all of Zero Two's pilots, which in the end is what eventually kills them. It is weird to me that it didn't appear after the first flight, only after the second one. You'd think there would be a smaller version of it after the first one if that was an issue. But regardless, I have to disagree with this defect theory, at least in terms of this being what happens to the other pilots as well, simply because we know that Hiro responds differently to Zero Two, and we learn the details of this later on, which I will discuss, but in short, we know that he does not respond to piloting with Zero Two the same way that everyone else does. So why would he have the same defect or disease as everyone else? There is a focus on Mitsuru, which, as you know, is the only other person who has piloted with Zero Two in our group, and he seems to be suffering from a similar issue. He's taking pills, he really seems out of it, and again, I will discuss this in more depth later on, but until we see Mitsuru's chest, I don't think we have any solid proof saying that this is what happens to the other pilots. In my mind, this is something exclusive to Hiro that means something for his compatibility with Zero Two. As for the details regarding this, we don't get much, but we do have a brief bit of dialogue from Nana and Hachi regarding something called yellow blood cells. Now, this is not a real thing. I am going to assume that this is a figmented body material for this series, but in that case, that just makes it all the more harder to actually dissect and see what's going on here. According to them, Hiro's body has been producing an abnormal amount of these yellow blood cells by piloting with her. But what stands out from this conversation is that this is the polar opposite reaction to what other pilots have resulted from piloting with Zero Two, assumedly losing yellow blood cells as opposed to gaining them and producing them. Now, this explains why Hiro has survived piloting with Zero Two, even though we don't know the science behind it. Since he is having that polar opposite reaction, that explains why he is compatible with her. But the speculation at this point is, what is the significance behind these cells? And if Hiro had an opposite reaction to the other pilots, why is he still suffering from this? And this just lends itself to what I said earlier. I feel like this alone confirms that the blue disease on Hiro's body is not something that other parasites have had. If he had an opposite reaction than the other parasites, why would his disease still be the same? Taking a break from the speculation for a second and talking about just everything that I liked in this episode, I have to just start out and say on the topic of Hiro that I found him to be the most compelling aspect about this episode above everything else. And I hope that his character work in this episode convinces more people that he isn't just some generic protagonist. I've been saying this for so many episodes at this point, but I can't stop saying it. There's so much potential for him to grow and change as a character, and that is shown beautifully in this episode, where they start playing around with a lot of interesting dynamics with his motivations and his relationships with other characters. And this is where I just want to talk about the direction of this episode as a whole. My god, it was absolutely spectacular. And I thought the direction for the series has always been good. It served its purpose, had a few great moments, but in this episode, it just took it to another level and elevated a lot of the character work that they were doing. And for Hiro in particular, there were some excellent standout moments that still resonate in my mind despite being so small and subtle. They were just that good that I still can't forget them. Two scenes in particular that I really enjoyed is the first scene where Hiro and Ichigo are just walking down the stairs, and Ichigo just reaches up to adjust his collar, and you see the discomfort and paranoia almost on his face of Ichigo finding out that he is not as well as he appears to be. And this is what I'm talking about when I say it elevates those character interactions. The direction just communicates that discomfort and pain that he feels throughout the episode, and in the beginning when you don't know exactly what's going on, it just really helps make us, the audience, feel uneasy and uncomfortable watching him go about his life despite some seemingly unknown disease. And of course, the second moment that I want to discuss, probably my favorite shot of the episode, is when Hiro and Goro are in their room talking. Goro finds out Hiro's secret and tells him he should not be piloting Strelitzia. It's too dangerous. He needs to get some help. And you can see Hiro's in pain, but he says, no, that is my decision. I will make that choice. And they cut back to Goro's face. He's clearly upset and mad at Hiro for making these decisions. And then just on a dime, despite looking so down and ill before in the previous shot, it cuts back to Hiro and he's just standing up and he looks perfectly normal. He looks perfectly fine, just showing his commitment and will to mask the disease he's carrying in order to pilot with Zero Two again and not worry anyone. So I love that shot. I love this direction. Not only is it just really cool to see that switch on a dime, but it really hits home what lengths Hiro is willing to go to pilot the Strelitzia maybe for one last time. He doesn't know. And that is because right now Hiro feels more alive than he has in a long time. And Goro speculates while talking to Ichigo if Hiro is faking his happiness. And we know that Hiro is putting up a facade so people don't know about how much he's suffering right now. But I do not think that this is affecting his emotional state. I think that he is being truthful and genuine about his happiness. He's finally not an outcast again. He can be amongst his friends. He has those leader qualities, and he's just treated with respect, which I think he does value. But I think above all of that, he just values being able to pilot a Franxx with Zero Two, like he mentioned last episode. That is what is most important to him. Now let's get into this entire Ichigo Zero Two confrontation, which as far as scenes go, probably was the best scene of the episode. It's hard to pinpoint exact scenes when this whole episode was just complete fire, but it was just this scene and the aftermath which gives the most to talk about and speculate on, so that's probably why I value it above the other scenes in this episode. I'm not going to go through the entire scene, but I do want to focus on the very end, where Zero Two admits that Hiro could definitely and easily die despite his compatibility with her, and I didn't even consider this an option. I thought Hiro was quote-unquote the chosen one, so he was pretty safe piloting with Zero Two. I wonder where this possibility comes from for dying. What makes Hiro special if he can die piloting with Zero Two as well? We know that he produces more yellow blood cells, but why is this important? Anyways, this comment about Hiro potentially dying obviously upsets Ichigo, and she ends up slapping Zero Two. I was not expecting that. And that slap ends up taking off Zero Two's horn helmet thingy that she wears, and this is where things get interesting. Now, there was a lot of speculation last episode that this horn thing was some kind of limiter to prevent Zero Two from transforming into her Klaxosaur self. And this is clearly shown from the red eyes that Zero Two has after this thing is knocked off. And this is where I expected shit to get real. I wouldn't have been surprised if Zero Two just immediately lunged at Ichigo and we had some kind of catfight going on. But apparently Zero Two is able to control this form, at least for the brief amount of time that she was in it, because if there was any time for Zero Two to go berserk, that would have been it. And it does raise the question on if this thing is actually a limiter or something else. Zero Two is still very strong in her human form, so my guess is with the red eyes, that helmet hair thing, I still don't know what to call it, but that thing might be what is making Zero Two look like a human. And maybe if a certain amount of time has passed and she isn't wearing that thing, she will revert back to the red monster looking thing that she looked like in the first episode. But even more impactful than that moment in this scene is what comes after. Ichigo telling Zero Two that she is heartless and not human if she doesn't care about Hiro's death. And Zero Two just simply responds with, "What is a human to you?" And this line is so powerful, and I feel like it will have major implications on what is going on in this world. Almost as if she knows or sees something in these plantations that the others don't. Is it simply a message about how all of these kids in this Franxx program are just trapped in these plantations and forced to serve this papa and fight Klaxosaurs? Or is it more literal, like she sees all of these children as less human than herself? Which, not to go too in depth with this other theory that's been brought up, but that would fit in line with this clone theory that I have seen a few people mention. Either way, this further reinforces what I mentioned in last week's episode with the key art of Zero Two looking down on Hiro and her shadow having this darker, more demonic presence to it. And the editing in that video messed up, so I'm gonna put that picture up again just so I can say I put it up. I showed you guys what I was talking about with the shadow. A lot of people didn't see my comment. That is what I was referring to. There's something more going on here than just it referring to her being a Klaxosaur. There's something inside Zero Two that is just darker and will have a presence later on in the series. Now, I know I keep mentioning that antagonist theory that I have for Zero Two. I still think it's a possibility, but at this point I feel like if Zero Two really didn't care about anybody other than Hiro, she probably would have at least hurt Ichigo back when she slapped her. One interesting theory I want to bring up about this scene with Ichigo and Zero Two is the very end after Zero Two asks what is a human to you. We get a shot of the horn thingy on the ground. Yes, I'm going to keep calling it that. And seemingly we see the rain begin to start. We see the first 3 drops hit the ground as it begins pouring down. But there was another interpretation that said that some of those drops might have been Zero Two's tears, which goes in line with what I said last episode about Zero Two being insecure and takes offense from being called a monster, which in this case Ichigo just called Zero Two heartless and not human. There's no close-up shot of Zero Two to confirm or deny this, and I think it does fit in line with what I picture Zero Two's character being, someone who just wants to be accepted like everyone else, which is why I decided to mention it. But at the same time, it could just be Rain and Zero Two looking up with her first experience with Rain. But that does lead me into my next bit of speculation, and that is, why hasn't Zero Two seen any Rain in her life? The fact that she hasn't does confirm, or at least support, that she has never grown up in a plantation. And if she hasn't grown up in a plantation, where has she been kept that she never sees any rain? I know the outside world looks pretty dry, but does that mean it just never rains on the outside? Are we that far gone into a post-apocalyptic world? It's interesting to think about, although all I can really do at this point is throw speculation and hope it sticks. For our next character spotlight, I want to focus on Mitsuru, and last episode I was talking about being really intrigued on where they take Mitsuru's character after Hiro successfully pilots with Zero Two. Will he respect Hiro? Will he not be able to accept it? Will he just mope around? Well, in this episode we see that it is the latter two of what I just said. The biggest mystery surrounding him now is he suffering from a similar Zero Two disease that Hiro is in this same episode? Something about the way that he's taking these pills and talking to himself definitely elicits a initial response of, oh no, he's going through the same thing. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And for one, that goes in line with what I said earlier about Hiro is the only one who's had this kind of reaction to Zero Two, so why would Mitsuru be going through the exact same thing? His dialogue feels very detached from the situation as well. The only thing he's worried about right now is why Hiro was able to pilot with Zero Two and not him. I feel like if he did have that big blue disease on his chest at this moment, he would be a lot more concerned with that than why Hiro was able to pilot with Zero Two. And if that is the case, I feel like these pills might be unrelated. I don't know what they're relating to. Maybe they're a part of his recovery from his events. But regarding the disease, in his defense, I did see a very compelling theory in the comments that said that Mitsuru might have the same or similar qualifications that Hiro has, which is why he didn't age and is probably why he is now suffering from the same illness that Hiro is. And honestly, that is the only explanation I can buy right now for why Mitsuru is not aging. And to add to that defense, the line about him worrying about Hiro being able to handle it and not him could just be him wondering why Hiro isn't suffering the same way he is, because Hiro's been hiding it so well he wouldn't know that Hiro is actually suffering on the inside. So with all of that in consideration, I feel like it could go either way with Mitsuru's character, and I feel like he will be a key component into understanding what Zero Two actually does to her partners. And the final character spotlight that I just want to focus on is Goro, best boy Goro. And there's not much I really have to say other than Goro's role in all of this is actually pretty tragic. I love the scene where he just has to lie in bed, listening to Hiro just in pain and not being able to handle it. He's tried to reason with Hiro and Hiro just is not having it, and being the best boy and best friend that he is, he's just accepting Hiro's choice. And it really helps you sympathize with his character and his entire situation. Speaking of Goro though, we have to talk about Goro liking Ichigo and Ichigo liking Hiro. Now Ichigo liking Hiro was obvious since episode 1. They have not tried to hide that by any means, but it was brought into question what Goro felt about Ichigo, if he felt that romantic interest and intimacy with her. And in this episode, as we see Ichigo breaking down after her conversation with Zero Two, we see that Goro does indeed like Ichigo as he reaches her hand for her to console her and just stops and just thinks, what is this feeling? What am I feeling right now? And I'm guessing what he feels is jealousy and envy that Ichigo is just so in love with Hiro and doesn't consider him at all. And of course, it's ironic that Ichigo is going through this same situation next to Goro, just so upset and frustrated that Hiro likes Zero Two and hardly considers her at all. And other than this little love triangle going on, the most interesting aspect about this to me is that these children don't really understand the concept of love or intimacy at all. They don't understand what they're feeling or why they're feeling that way. And someone said this in the comments, but this completely supports why the euphemisms and the ridiculousness of the piloting doesn't faze them at all, because they just don't understand. They don't get these concepts like we do. So I enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot. I like that there is that bit of irony in the writing, that these characters don't understand the concepts that we do. With the character work out of the way, let's talk about the world building in this episode, which we did get a decent amount of. For one, we get our first look at a different plantation's pilots. And they look pretty normal, not really anything to speculate on here. They are not the ones that we see in the opening. I saw some people in the comments saying that the pilots that we see in the opening might be the pilots for this plantation that we're kissing with in this episode. Not so, it's a different group altogether. Like I said, those pilots that we see in the opening are almost guaranteed to be the nines that we have heard about in last week's episode. But no, it's this interaction with this different plantation's pilots where we learn some very interesting things. One detail being probably the most interesting piece of world building that we got in the entire episode. But before we get into the most interesting one, I just have to go over the other things that we learned. For one, apparently all other plantations' Franxx designs are incredibly similar to one another and all feature the same equipment. And of course that's very different from our own plantation, and they even speculate on this. They're like, why are your Franxx designs so different? Why do you refer to each other by nicknames instead of your code numbers? This entire plantation is just so different from all the other ones. Now we knew that our plantation, Plantation 13, were irregulars compared to the other plantations, but what makes them irregulars? That is the real question at this point. They talk about these similar Franxx designs and the equipment and the code numbers as if it helps them function better as a team. So why would APE treat our plantation differently? Speaking of referring to each other by nicknames, we learn that Hiro is actually famous amongst all of the plantation's children. Now, we knew that he was special to this group because he had that leader-like quality. He was giving other people names, but what makes him famous amongst the other plantations as well? What did he do in the past that has garnered him that recognition? It can't be that it's just because he was giving people nicknames. There has to be more to it. But unfortunately, I have no further information on this, so I can't really speculate on what it was, other than maybe he was just such a prodigy as a child that other plantations plantations heard about him. But no, let's get into the most interesting piece of world building in this conversation. Zorome asks the other squad if any of their group have quote-unquote become adults. Now, this wasn't even a concept that was brought up in the past, that some of their squad or some of our squad could potentially become adults. And when first asked, even the leader's like, what? Become adults? What does that mean? And one of his partners says they probably don't know. And of course, this is heavy foreshadowing to something, some kind of revelation in the future regarding what happens to these children once they eventually leave this Franxx program. And of course, this alludes to whatever happened to Naomi in the first episode. Some people speculate that she was killed off. Again, I disagree. I think they were being truthful about her being in a hospital, but where were those pods taking her before? Where was she going? And why did she feel like she didn't need her belongings anymore? This other plantation clearly knows something that we don't, but why don't we know it? Why are we the only ones left in the dark about this? This also raises the question on what adults are. I brought up, I think in episode 3, that I think these cities that we keep seeing underneath the plantations are where the adults live. I don't think any children live there. I think it is a world filled with adults. I just wonder what the significance is. Is that the upper class where you're just set for life, you get to live in luxury and let these children do all the fighting for you? And if that's the case, why are Nana and Hachi, clearly adults, still in this Franxx program? There is a lot more going on here than we realize, and I can't wait for those future revelations, those future plot reveals, when we finally get the answers, the truth about this entire society. Wrapping up with a few final details that I just wanted to mention, not really much for me to say about these except that I found it interesting. On the first watch of this episode, I noticed that the boys and the girls were separated into separate dormitories or separate wings, and I didn't pay it any mind because that's very typical. That is very normal for these kinds of establishments to have the boys and the girls sleeping in separate sections. But it was only on rewatch that I noticed that at breakfast, when they're all eating, the boys and the girls are eating and are supposed to sit at separate tables. And of course, Zero Two doesn't listen to this, which means that Futoshi has to go sit at the girls' table. So it's obviously not a hardened rule, but it does make me wonder, why separate these people at all at breakfast? Especially when you consider what is powering these Franxx, you would figure that APE would want to keep their partners close together to improve their sync ratio and improve their compatibility. This entire program feels like it's leeching off of their pubescence and the way that they feel about each other, so why would you want to separate them during meals and of course while they're sleeping? Of course, I might be reading too much into this and it's just typical to separate the boys and the girls while they're eating. I don't know. I just find it interesting that they do go along with this despite the purpose of the Franxx. And the last piece of information that I have to talk about, not really much to even say about this, just that we finally learn what it is. We learn that the plantation's kissing is just the act of transferring magma from one to the other, and that is why the Klaxosaurs are attacking, because of course they're attracted to magma. Again, we still have no explanation for why we are harvesting magma as a resource, the thing that the Klaxosaurs so desperately want. That seems very counterintuitive unless there's some ulterior motive to these. But that's been all from me for this Darling in the Franxx episode review. Overall, just an excellent episode. Even if you don't think this is the best, I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And above everything that it actually handled in the episode, it just gets me excited for future episodes and where they can take these characters. Thank you all for the likes, comments, support. I love talking to you guys about this series. This is just so much fun to keep speculating on. And I know I'm not the only one. I see everybody just having a blast coming up with theories, their own reasoning and explanations, and that is my favorite part about doing these reviews, is just being able to talk to all of you about them. But of course, as usual, have a great day.